So, I recently sat down to watch the OG Universal Monster movies from the 30s and 40s for Halloween, and I figured, hey, in the spirit of spoopy season, why don't we just go ahead and rank these bad boys and make a video out of it? So, we'll give you a quick summation of each film and the order in which they premiered, give you some trivia and commentary along the way, and then, I'll give you some rankings at the end. Just to keep things simple, we're talking the OGs only, not the countless spin-offs or sequels, so no Son of Frankenstein, no Cousin of Dracula, no Mummy's sister's boyfriend's college roommate. Talking what I like to call the core four. Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy, and Wolfman, in that order. I almost included Bride of Frankenstein, but she technically qualifies as a sequel, or like a spin-off. And I was really tempted to include Creature from the Black Lagoon. He's typically kind of thrown into these, the Universal Monsters movie universe or whatever, but apparently that movie was filmed in late 1950s when Universal was kind of aiming more towards sci-fi rather than horror. That movie was made not only in a completely different style, but at a totally different time period and climate. So for today's purposes, I just want to examine the initial four classics in the order they premiered and discuss the effects they may have had on audiences at the time and pop culture and the effect they made on horror movies as a whole. So with that out of the way, let's just jump on into it, shall we? Let's get this. When initially sitting down to watch Dracula, I assumed that I'd already heard this story, and different versions of it several times, as there have just been so many vampire movies. But upon settling in, I realized rather quickly that the story of Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula, was one that I actually really wasn't that familiar with. Had I heard and seen the name Dracula countless of times in several iterations? Of course I had, as I assume you all have. But the actual story of Renfield traveling to Transylvania and Dracula traveling to London, it turns out I didn't think I had ever properly just sat down and consumed it, and it was a treat. So just to give a really quick summation of the plot, a real estate broker named Renfield travels to Transylvania to lease a property in London to Count Dracula. Although the townspeople warn him this is an increasingly bad decision, and on no uncertain terms should he not go there because he is a vampire, they explicitly tell him, do not go to Dracula's castle, he is a vampire.
Dracula and his wives, they take the form of wolves and bats. They leave their coffins at night, and they feed on the blood of the living.
He goes anyway, of course. There's a hilarious scene when he's making his way to Dracula's castle, where the coach driver, supposedly Dracula himself, turns into a bat. And while guiding the horses, we get this goofy jump cut of a floppy rubber bat pulling the reins of these horses down a narrow path heading towards the... Oh my god! I fucking love it! So he makes his way to the castle. Dracula then welcomes Renfield, and Bela Lugosi is absolutely pitch perfect in this role. I haven't seen many absolutely born to play casting choices in my life. Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool comes to mind as one. Arnold as Terminator. But I would absolutely put Lugosi in the same conversation. His line reads, they've become parody for a reason. They are simply iconic.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
Renfield then gets his paperwork signed, and in the morning they are to set sail to London. However, that night, Dracula apparently slips something in his wine. Renfield he passes out, he's bitten, and therein enslaved by Dracula. The next time we see him, he is aboard a ship being tossed about the ocean, where he maniacally talks to Dracula in his coffin about the possibility of being fed small rats and bugs to satiate his now quenching thirst for blood. There's an interesting point regarding Dracula traveling by sea in the novel. It's written that one of the rules of the vampire is they must sleep on their own soil. I remember thinking to myself then, how the hell is he sleeping on the ship? And what is he to do once he gets to London if he has to sleep on Transylvanian soil? And it doesn't come about till later on in the film, but apparently Renfield had to pack like several boxes of Dracula's soil specifically for this purpose. So I thought that was kind of a cool note that happened later on in the movie that gets addressed that I just wanted to include. By the time they arrive to port, the entire crew has been killed, supposedly by Dracula for sustenance during the long trip. I love the idea of cabin members just slowly being killed off one by one, seemingly all knowing the entire time who the culprit truly is, but really not being able to do anything about it. He had to have kept them alive sparingly, if granted how long this trip was, we don't know, but the last crew member had to have watched all of his fellow mates getting eaten one by one. Meanwhile, the stark raving lunatic continues drolling on and on to the mysterious box that only opens at night. I almost wish they had explored this portion of the story more. I can only imagine it was the 30s and their ability to shoot scenes at sea were probably limited at best. But moving on, we arrive to London, and at port, the authorities discover the crew has been slain, with the only survivor being said stark raving lunatic Renfield drolling on about eating flies and spiders. Unsurprisingly, they immediately convict him to sanitarium. Dracula, however, makes his way to his rental property at Carfax Abbey. Almost immediately, he launches into a debaucherous jaunt upon the unsuspecting townsfolk. He eats them, he manipulates them by what is this, hilariously depicted in the 1930s vampire glare, where Dracula just uncomfortably stares at the camera for a few seconds.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Dracula uses his gaze to sneak into the London Symphony, and it is here he meets his neighbors, Dr. Stewart and his daughter Mina, her fiancé John, and her friend, I believe her name is Lucy? Spoilers, but Lucy isn't long for this world, so I think I got her name right. It might have been Rachel. Well, we meet an accomplished doctor by the name of Van Helsing back at the sanitarium. Dr. Van Helsing figures out Renfield has become a vampire, and interestingly suggests they use wolfsbane as a cure rather than the typical garlic. This was a peculiar change. I'm curious if this was direct from the novel or a liberty the writers took. Interestingly, I lean towards a deliberate choice, as I'm not sure it's no secret by now Mina will become a vampire herself. And Dr. Helsing, he covers her room in wolfsbane in an attempt to ward off Dracula from coming back to her, and Mina ends up commenting that it's more annoying than repelling. So anyways, Dracula visits Renfield at the sanitarium, and we see our first occurrence of Dracula communicating telepathically. Renfield begs Dracula not to eat Mina. The next morning, we see Mina being tended to by Jonathan, complaining of bad dreams, and she's wrapped herself in a large scarf. It is of course left to Dr. Van Helsing to unravel her scarf, only to discover 2 red puncture marks with a white center. Everyone around her is constantly telling her to go to bed to rest. Unknowingly, because she is turning into a vampire, she's feeling under the weather. And in a clever moment from the filmmakers, it isn't until Dracula tells her to go to bed to rest that she finally concedes. Van Helsing immediately sniffs out that not only is Mina turning into a vampire, but it is indeed Dracula who has infected her, proving to everyone else Dracula is a vampire by showing them he has no reflection. For one who has not lived but a single lifetime, you are a wise man, Van Helsing. I love this moment, not just for the underlying assumption that Dracula has obviously lived many lives, but ever the brooding gentleman, Dracula takes a moment to compliment his adversary out of respect. Almost like Batman. You have this otherworldly, supernatural force clashing toe-to-toe with ultimately just what amounts to an ordinary man. A clever man, but still just a man. And it is in his ordinariness that Dracula finds this respect, almost an admiration for Helsing, albeit hesitantly, as he acknowledges them as enemies. Dracula and Helsing then get one last face-to-face before the big showdown, where they each proclaim their intentions once and for all. Each player lays their cards on the table. Dracula tells Helsing that he intends to kill Mina, and Helsing tells Dracula he will drive a stake straight into his heart. The chemistry it's electric between these two. The moment it's played quietly. There's no knockdown, drag fight. They don't scream at each other. It's a calculated battle of wits, a chess game where each is playing their moves with precision and caution. Dracula attempts to use his power of suggestion, the glare, on Van Helsing, but it doesn't work. The acting in the rest of this film, it's loud. All of the actors are exaggerating their parts because they had a stage background. It's not entirely familiar what acting looks like in movies at this point because it's fucking 1931. But in quiet, dark cinemas, you can linger on the close-up of a face, and with just the twitch of a mouth or the roll of the eyes, you can tell a story. It's exquisitely played perfectly. We get this moment between these two. We'll see the will of Dracula at first attempting to sway Helsing, but the hero then stands tall and fights the gaze, something that Dracula probably, up until this point, has never witnessed before.
Your will is strong, Van Helsing.
In another clever moment from the filmmakers, Mina stares at Jonathan's neck as they pine for each other, obviously, like, wanted to bite him. I thought that was kind of cool.
What's the matter?
Oh, nothing. Nothing at all.
And one of the only moments of brevity, in fact, the only example of a joke I could find in all four of these films are played, like, horrifically straight, pun intended. We hear the caretakers say to one of the maids, "They're crazy," and then he answers it back.
They're all crazy. They're all crazy except you and me. Sometimes I have me doubts about you.
Yes.
Dracula takes Mina to the Abbey, where Van Helsing and Jonathan follow. Dracula kills Renfield for leading them to his lair, and just as the day is about to break, Dracula hides in his coffin, hiding Mina down in the dungeon. Van Helsing, as promised, drives a stake through Dracula's heart in his coffin, and Mina escapes with Jonathan, supposedly free from the vampire's grasp. You know, it's beat for beat a classic. Even though this movie is almost a century old, you'd assume the pacing wouldn't really play in today's age of, ultimate distractions. We live in a different time where movies don't really have time to build tension and chew the scenery like they did in the golden age of cinema. But that being said, at a runtime of just over 60 minutes, this movie fucking cruises by. As mentioned, Bela Lugosi, he makes this movie for me. The rest of the actors, they had been brought in from the play, and it shows in their performances. As I referenced earlier, a lot of their parts are exaggerated. They're used to playing things loud so people in the back of the theater can still see what's going on. But, as mentioned, in a dark theater, you can be a little more subtle. And the excellent acting by Lugosi and the gentleman who plays Van Helsing, they really shine amongst some of the playwrights, they're the stage actors that play the other parts in this. Lugosi in particular, he takes his time, he slows things down. At times you almost find yourself, wanting to lean in to hear him as he speaks, because it's almost at a whisper. This is like in direct contrast against the high spots of the violence and the excitement. So it's kind of like a roller coaster in comparison to 1930s film. Again, we're comparing this to cinema today where, we have Avengers and all these nasty gore. So, beat for beat, I think it holds up. I had a great time. I love this movie. Highly recommend it. Let's check out the next one. Alright, so Frankenstein. Before the movie even starts, we get a warning from our old friend Bela Lugosi that lays out an ominous warning before us that what we are about to see may be jarring for some viewers. This was necessary, as even before the movie aired they knew it was going to freak people the fuck out, and boy did it! We open with a funeral where Dr. Henry Frankenstein and Fritz wait until it's over, then dig up and steal the body. In Mary Shelley's novel, the protagonist, named Victor Frankenstein, and his assistant is Igor. In this one, Victor is Henry's friend, and Fritz is his hunchback assistant. So they dig up the body, and they soon discover the neck was broken, and they need to obtain a new brain. Fritz, the hunchback, steals a new brain, but because he drops the good brain, he has to settle for the quote-unquote abnormal brain, or the brain that was removed from a, murderer. What could possibly go wrong? We then cut to see Henry's fiancée Elizabeth, worrying about him because he's been away for so long conducting his experiments. She whines to her friend Victor, who again is not the main character of the novel. The main character is Henry Frankenstein. Victor is Henry's friend who's aiding Henry's girlfriend while he's away working at the lab. So we have Elizabeth whining to Henry's best friend Victor about how she misses him and she's pining for him, and Victor decides it's a good time to admit that he's totally in love with her. He gets totally fucking friend-zoned, and they decide, you know what, hey, we're gonna go see Henry, we're off to the lab we go. When they arrive at Henry's lab, he won't let them in to see his experiments. It's not until Victor calls Henry crazy that he finally relents.
Crazy, am I? We'll see whether I'm crazy or not. Come on up.
And an obvious foreshadowing of Henry's insecurities about his experiments and what he believes people will think of them. So against Henry's better judgment, he allows them all upstairs to witness his experiments. Up in the lab, we get the scene. The scene that everybody fucking knows. We have the iconic lab and the electricity and the beakers. You know, it's basically become every mad scientist lab in every movie ever after this one. It's iconic and parodied for a reason. Henry raises the body up and lightning strikes in one of the most replayed and parodied scene moments in cinema history and exclaims, "It's alive!
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! In the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God."
That last line about him knowing what it feels like to be God was actually cut out of the movie shortly after the release, along with a couple other scenes we're about to get to that just freaked people out too bad. We're going to get to it, but this movie, the ripple effects of its release were felt among the nation like almost immediately, and they had to make edits just because people were freaking out. Sometimes I feel like this movie, and more importantly this scene, really doesn't get the proper attention or accolades it deserves, because our memories of it have truly been sullied by the impact it laid before pop culture since the 1930s. This was jaw-dropping stuff. Even rewatching it again, it still gives me the chills to this day. And so does this next scene. After a couple of days go by, we then get our reveal of the monster. And in an effort to build tension as long as possible, we hear the slow, lumbering footsteps. The monster walks in backwards, swinging his chin around to reveal that stunning, iconic makeup. It goes to show how practical effects will hold up way better over time. This was a century old, and look how fucking good this looks. This looks like miles ahead of most of the shit we see today. Like, put this up against any other remake of Frankenstein, and, like, I dare you to tell me that those look better than this. Like the fucking Van Helsing or Robert De Niro. Like, come on, man. It's perfect. I don't know how they did it so good. It's like the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. It's like, you watch it, or Star Wars, when the ships go by, it's just, they knew what the fuck they were doing. And it's part of the reason this movie has stood the test of time. Boris Karloff does do a great job just kind of looking like a fucking monster. Not to besmirch his talent, he's a gifted actor, but a lot of what he was able to accomplish here is because of the practical special makeup effects work. Again, and I keep saying this, but it's true, like, it's iconic for a reason. Like, this was just burnt in people's brains. I cannot imagine what it must have been like to be in a theater goer back in the 30s, to actually just be presented with this for the first time. Like, what a genuine monster would actually look like. All these questions are swirling around in your head about morality and one's humanity. You know, what does this monster know? What does it feel? And what does it truly mean to be a human? All of these things swirling around at the same time, and then you're being confronted with this, what had to have been horrifying imagery. I get now why Universal opened this film with caution. It fucked people up. It was an experience. It was like an attraction. It elicits the type of emotion in what can only be described as the very genre in which it created. Horror. Okay, so trapped in darkness for several days, when the monster finally reveals itself, Henry wants to give it light, wants it to experience light for the first time. And when the monster sees this, he reaches up to the heavens as Henry opens this window. Not capable of yet understanding what it's seeing, the monster is overcome with a flush of these primitive, instinctive desires. Just a want to learn, to explore, a want to live. This moment it's quickly snuffed out as Fritz enters the room bearing a torch, which thrusts the monster into the complete opposite, the equal opposite ends of that spectrum. Fear. A fear of pain, of death, a fear of the life that was just miraculously given to this monster just moments ago being stripped away as quickly as it was given. A small tussle ensues, and they're able to subdue the monster long enough to get him back up to his cell. And when we cut to the monster chained up in its cell, he's swaying his arms back and forth, incapable of formulating words or sentences. He just screams, and we are now truly confronted with the horror of Dr. Frankenstein's creation. Just an abomination, truly best described as a monster. Fritz enters, whipping him and scaring him with the fire, and just as quickly as we feared this thing, we are now feeling sorry for it. And as so many similar stories before, the abused then become the abusers, as we hear Fritz cry from Henry's lab as he races upstairs just in time to see the monster has strung him up by the throat, killing Fritz.
Good riddance.
They lead the monster out of the cell and inject it with a tranquilizer in attempts to kill the beast. In just a matter of minutes, we've been pulled emotionally. It's like all these different directions. It's borderline traumatic unto itself. The movie truly it lays the roadmap for what would become modern day horror. From these jump scares to building tension to, again, questions of humanity, flesh horror, I forget what they call that, where you're a body horror. It's all of it combined into one. You can see little traces of Frankenstein in every horror movie you see. The monster inevitably escapes, and we are given a scene that has cemented itself in my subconscious for basically my entire adult life. When I was a kid, I rented a kid's version of this book. Don't ask me why they thought it was the 90s. It was a different time. Anyways, I was in my library at school, and they had one of those big picture books, but it was a novelization of the Frankenstein movie. So it had pictures from the film, and then little segments of what happened in each scene. And I just so happened to open the book randomly to this page, to this scene. Frankenstein comes across a little girl tossing daisies into the lake. The little girl doesn't know that Frankenstein's a monster. She doesn't care. She shows the monster how to pluck the daisies from the stem and then just toss it into the lake. You take something pretty, pluck it, throw it in the water, and now you have something pretty in the water. One after another they do this, just plucking flowers and tossing them. It's a rare moment of brevity for the creature. Until they run out of daisies. With no more pretty things to toss in, the monster picks up the little girl, breaks her neck, and tosses her in the lake. He took something pretty, plucked the head, tossed it into the water, and now he had something pretty in the water. It's sickening in its simplicity. Even a mindless creature can understand it. As can a horrified child at the library. This was the other scene they banned, by the way. They had to cut this out shortly after release. It just freaked people out too much. Later we see Elizabeth, and she is distraught that something is going to come between her and Henry. Henry reassures her that everything will be fine when they hear the moan of the monster. Henry runs outside and locks Elizabeth into her room. They search the house to no avail, only to hear Elizabeth cries, and because he has locked her in, nobody can come to her aid. The monster slips out the window just as Henry unlocks the door. She's startled, but she's okay. Henry tells Victor that he cannot be married until he kills the monster, and when Victor offers to go help, Henry declines, telling his friend Victor, who admitted that he loves Henry's girlfriend Elizabeth, that he leaves her in his care, no matter what. Famous last words, almost as if to say, if I die, go ahead and bang my wife. We then see the father of the little girl at the lake carrying her lifeless body through the town square. This riles up a mob, who join Henry in hunting down the creature. From here, we all know the story. Cue pitchforks and torches, they chase the monster to the windmill, Frankenstein attempts to calm the monster down, leaving the monster to kill his creator, and the mob burns down the windmill in response. Ultimately succumbing to its biggest fear, fire. We end on the discovery that Henry actually survived the fall afterwards and will recover to marry Elizabeth after all. This is, in my opinion, the perfect movie. I've heard Martin Scorsese say that Princess Bride is a perfect film, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think it has some slow parts, but I think Frankenstein is. There is not a wasted scene in this movie. It's every moment is necessary. It just drives the plot. There really isn't a moment you could pick out without severely hindering the story. It's a tight 1 hour, 14 minutes of just, it's a non-stop thriller. I can't oversell the impact this movie had. Without it, there would be no monster universe. Dracula was good, but don't get me wrong, people loved it. But Frankenstein was a phenomenon. It was like Star Wars big. Bela Lugosi was actually approached to take the lead role as the monster, but he felt it was beneath him, and he wanted to play Henry. The studio disagreed, so they would, ultimately reach out to a relatively unknown in Boris Karloff, who would, after this film, he would just become the king of horror. In fact, we'll see these constant cast of characters repeat themselves throughout these Universal monster movies. You might have even noticed some recurring faces. The Doctor at one point is actually the actor who played Van Helsing. Renfield from the first movie plays Fritz in this one. But yeah, I can't say enough glowing things about this. It's my favorite Halloween movie. I come back to it every Halloween. I highly suggest, if you haven't watched it this year, next year, get some fucking candy corn that everybody hates or whatever, make some caramel popcorn, turn the lights down, and fucking watch Frankenstein, man, because it's perfect. Everything about it was perfect, to the last detail. Alright, Wolfman! This one's gonna go a lot quicker. There's not a lot that happens in this. It's gonna be a pretty quick summation. Our protagonist, Larry Talbot, returns home to Wales to bury his recently deceased brother and reconcile with his estranged father.
It's funny to see people back then and how well dressed they were.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. You look at these old 30s movies and they're just walking down the street in a suit and top hat. That was just the normal attire for the day.
When did everyone start dressing like shit? Must have been right around the 70s.
Yeah.
During the hippie era, yeah.
Yep.
The 70s, everyone just started dressing and smelling like shit. Doing drugs.
Yeah. Literally became cool to do so.
Your brother's death was a blow to all of us.
That blows me away, that Woodstock where they had the quote-unquote mud pits and they were trying to act like they were in the Woodstock from the years before, and then turned out it was the septic system and they're all rolling around in shit.
I didn't know about that.
So bad.
Did I ever show you that there's footage of someone saying that?
I don't know. It
Probably. Someone certainly said that at some point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I was mighty proud when you won the Belgian Prize for research.
Did I ever show you that Smeagol clip? The guy who looks just like Smeagol at this Woodstock party that was going on where people are playing in the mud.
No, it sounds hilarious.
It's this cracked out druggie who he just looks so emaciated. And when he walks on screen, it cues the Lord of the Rings music.
Now back home in Wales, Larry basically immediately falls in love with a woman he buys a silver walking stick from. He asks her out, and they agree to go on a date to a gypsy in the forest so her and her friend Jenny can get their fortunes read. The gypsy man reads their fortune and notices a star on her hand. This startles the man, and he immediately insists that they leave. While Larry attempts to sway Gwen, he hears Jenny being attacked. He runs to her aid, noting that she was being attacked by a wolf. He beats the wolf to death with his new silver walking stick, getting bitten in the process. In the morning, the crime scene is investigated by police to discover not only has Jenny been killed, but so has the gypsy who read her fortune. They confront Larry about this, who is startled to not only learn it was not a wolf who he killed, but his wounds have also healed overnight. The gypsy's partner reveals to Larry that the wolf who bit him was a werewolf, and that Larry is now too a werewolf, and that silver is the only thing that can kill a werewolf. She gives him a charm to prevent the transformation, but in an attempt to keep his new beau safe, he gives the necklace to Gwen. Kinda ironic, because he gives the necklace that keeps people from changing into werewolves, and Gwen isn't a werewolf, but he is, so giving her the necklace was kinda stupid, if you ask me. Typical guy thinking with his head, not his brain, whatever. And just like predicted, Larry transforms into the Wolfman.
Is this how he transforms? You think there's gonna be like a transition scene, or do you think he's just gonna fall behind like a bed or something and then stand up wearing a werewolf suit?
I'm guessing there's gonna be a transition scene similar to the one we just saw. Like it's gonna be a fade over where it's, the Wolfman outfit, the Wolfman face kinda fades over his. That's what I'm guessing. He's got a pretty epic dad bod.
Oh, look.
I'll have to break it off. Whoa, go back?
Go back
Look
to
at
what?
that foot! Pause, wait, pause. Look at his foot!
Which
That's
one?
The real fucking... The one on the left. That's the real fucking monster. I've heard of your second toe being longer than your big toe, but his second toe is like shriveled all short, and his third toe is longer than his big toe. What a fucking monster!
No, I'm pretty sure the second toe is just tucked in there.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's just a weird looking feet. And I'm not referring to the hair. That's the real monster here. Surprised they didn't play the horror theme over this.
Zooming into
the fucking feet.
Zooming in strictly up to the left, the foot on the left, and the toe.
Look at that gangly toe. Whoa! I called it.
Those are silly looking.
I kind of like the detail of him walking up on his tippy toes, though.
I don't. I think it's terrible.
Really? Well, no,
Yeah.
That's how dogs walk, though.
I know, but the illusion's just not there. Oh, I've seen this clip before. This is iconic, yeah. I've definitely seen this version of the werewolf. Or the Wolfman.
The makeup is killer.
Yeah, the face is actually good.
It's probably the best werewolf I've seen.
Why is he wearing that shirt when he had a wife beater on before?
Oh! Yeah, did he get dressed?
I guess.
He put on his fucking best werewolf blues. While transformed as the Wolfman, he ends up killing a villager. He comes to the next morning with no memory of the slaughter, but wolf tracks lead right from the body to Larry's house. In an effort to kill the wolf, the townspeople organize a night hunt and set traps. The next night, Larry is caught in the trap, and gypsies use a spell to transform him back to his human form so he can be freed before the hunting party finds him. Distraught, Larry resigns himself to leave town, discovering that those who have the pentagram on their hand will be the Wolfman's next victim, and he sees this pentagram on Gwen's hand. He confesses to his father that he is the Wolfman, but his father doesn't believe him. That night, Larry transforms and attacks Gwen. Not recognizing him, his father beats him to death with his own silver cane. The gypsy comes back yet again and speaks the spell to transform Larry back into his human form. Only then do Larry and Gwen realize the horror upon them as the dared werewolf transforms into Larry's corpse. This was a cute little romp, very low stakes, not a lot happens. It's got a cute little love story in it. Fun little popcorn flick. If I watched this as a double feature in a drive-in, would be the perfect wind-down movie against, like, Dracula or Frankenstein, which I believe was the intention. Once again, makeup is just iconic. There's some great imagery and scenes in this. I cannot think of a better-looking werewolf for my money. Just a fun little movie, like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Not great, not offensive, doesn't overstay its welcome. Just fun, spoopy fare. All for it. Ugh, The Mummy. Dude, this movie was excruciatingly slow. Nothing fucking happens. It blew my mind how slow and bad this movie is. And come to find out, The Mummy ain't even fucking in it. Boris Karloff, who plays Frankenstein, he gets first billing over The Mummy. They're pushing the actor as a better selling point than the fucking monster. That's how over Frankenstein was back in the 30s. It is complete revisionist history to even include The Mummy in the same conversation as these other 3 films or as part of this monster universe. The Mummy isn't even fucking in it! They show The Mummy for like 3 seconds in the first 10 minutes, and then it's just some old dude who's supposed to be the Mummy for the rest of the movie. Just a regular looking ass guy. Look, I could bore you with the summation. Actually, you know what? Fuck it. Let's do it. Let's do it. I'm literally just gonna go through this like it's gonna take like 30 seconds, alright? 2 guys break into a crypt and steal a mummy. The mummy escapes. 10 years later, they break into another crypt and steal another mummy. It's the first mummy's girlfriend. Her descendant gets mind-controlled by Daddy Mummy, and he wants to kill her. She gets saved. Mummy dies. That's it. That's the whole movie, stretched out for fucking 60 minutes. Alright, you remember Brendan Fraser's remake from the 90s? That's a good movie. You want to watch a good mummy movie? Go watch that one. But it's not scary. It's an action movie. I certainly don't go pop on Brendan Fraser come fucking Halloween time, and I damn for sure won't run this piece of crap any Halloween ever again. Fucking 0 out of 10. Remember how we said the first 2 movies felt really quick? Like an hour just zooms by? This movie is a little over an hour, and it feels like a fucking 3-hour tour through fucking seaweed-infested waters. Do yourself a favor, don't watch it. 0 out of 10. So obviously Frankenstein is going at number 1. As I said earlier, it's basically a perfect film. I have no complaints. It's the tentpole that holds this whole franchise together and launched the, quote-unquote universe that still holds popularity today. If Captain America was the first Avenger, then Frankenstein is Iron Man, Tony Stark. It's because of the popularity of Frankenstein that all these other movies got made, and they were really all chasing that same high that they got off their big blockbuster hit Frankenstein for basically all the spin-offs and sequels afterwards. So, first placed, King Crown, best movie, I love it, watch it, now. Dracula comes in at a close second. I wouldn't say I like this movie more or less, but just watching it for the first time this year for this list, it really felt special. I really, really enjoyed it. Bela Lugosi, in my opinion, is the best actor in all these movies. He has the best portrayal, he has the best role, the best character. Boris Karloff, he kind of just grumbled and then monotoned his way into superstardom with Frankenstein and the Mummy. But Lugosi could actually act. Those readings of Dracula made the vampire cliche. I don't think if Lugosi portrays Dracula in this film, we don't get the dozens of Bram Stoker spin-offs, or Twilights, or Daybreaks, or any other vampire spin-off crap we saw over the next century. I mean, for sure, wouldn't have gotten Frankenstein, so, bonus points for being the trendsetter and kickstarting this universe. So, Second place, still a fucking awesome movie. Wolfman, like I said, kind of fun. A little slow at parts, not a terrible, complex, or deep film. It didn't achieve anything groundbreaking, but I don't think it set out to. They went into that movie to make a popcorn monster movie, and I think they achieved that. It doesn't try to be anything it's not, and actually, I think for what it is, it's a pretty entertaining outing. One that I'll probably end up revisiting in the coming Halloweens moving forward. It's fun. Third on the list, check it out. But see these first 2 first, and if you still want to keep getting into more, Wolfman is a suitable third outing if you decide you want to pursue it. And then The Mummy. Poopy diaper rapper Dusty Egypt band, go back to your crypt, no one likes you. Oh, I hated it. I'm genuinely surprised it's gotten away with being lumped into the same universe for this long and hasn't been outed for the absolute slog that it is. I legit had to struggle to keep my eyelids, I was falling asleep. If you take Boris Karloff off that poster for this movie, I don't think you get the Mummy in this universe, and then I don't think mummies in general as a, archetype or supernatural creature, I don't think that becomes associated with classic horror. Like, the mummy has become a staple in all of, Halloween decorations and pop culture or whatever. Really, it's because of this movie that made mummies scary. Like, they were just historical figures before this. So, I guess it gets a point for that. But that is the only point I will allow this piece of crap to get on this list. It went from a 0 out of 10 to maybe a 1 out of 10, or a 0.5 out of 10. Definitely 4th place. Well, there you have it. My God, I worked hard in this video. I've been working on it all week. As I sit here recording this, it's about 3:30 in the morning, Halloween morning, and I still got to upload and do art. And I'm not sleeping tonight. But I wanted to get a Halloween special out for you guys. I love you. I've been kind of preoccupied with the podcast and my personal life lately, combined with not really having a direction for the channel. So I really hoped you guys like this video, and it does well. If you stayed this long, you must have enjoyed it. So make sure you hit that like button on the way out. And don't forget to check out the podcast. Okay. Link in description. Okay. I love you guys. I will see you in the next one. Have a great Halloween. If you're gonna go out and trick-or-treat, make sure you check all your kids' candy. There are fucking psychos out there. I mean, there aren't. I did an episode on podcast about that, and you can check it out. It's really cool. But there really might be people out there that look bad because you better check it out. Okay, bye!